Good day, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Military and Foreign Affairs Network. I am your host, the voice of reason. Today, we're continuing our ongoing coverage of various world conflicts and what is happening here in the ununited States of America as well. But first, I want to start today back over in the war between the Russian Federation, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, and its Ukrainian proxy forces. Now, the headlines, if you search what is happening within the confines of this conflict, meaning the war that is taking place inside of the Ukraine, you'll see one excerpt that's rather interesting. ISW. Ukraine pushes forward in Kursk Oblast. Well, that's the first, right? Ukraine pushes forward in Kursk Oblast, while Russia gains ground near Volhodar. While Russia gains ground near Volhodar. Volodar is past tense. We're no longer talking about Volodar. But let's digress. Let's go up and let's look at this Ukrainian supported mapping service that usually is a little slow on the gun in terms of the territory that the Russians have captured. Now let's look again. The Institute of the Study of War. So the Ukrainians are pushing forward in Kursk. All right, let's see where exactly the Ukrainians are pushing forward in Kursk. I'm not seeing anywhere where the Ukrainians are pushing for. The only real update that has occurred on this mapping site is here. And that was yesterday, and this is today. Yesterday, today. Yesterday, today. So, in all likelihood, this blue has probably been pushed back even further at this point. So the Ukrainians are not pushing forward in the Kursk Oblast. They're hunkering down. The soldiers are disenfranchised. They are not happy. It is getting colder. And they are surrounded by Russian forces. And in many cases, fairly high-quality Russian forces at that. And now we're also hearing reports of the possibility that the North Koreans could also inject forces into this area as well. So I'm not sure how the ISW is saying that the Ukrainians are pushing forward in Kursk. That would lead one to believe, just by seeing that headline, that the Ukrainians are pressing forward with some sort of offensive inside of the Russian Federation. And that's simply not the case. It's not happening. It is not happening. Now, if we go over and we look at what is happening in the Donbass offensive, even inside of to Zaporizhzhia to some extent, that's a whole other ballgame. The Russians are pushing forward in these areas. A couple of areas to look at, again, Volhodar. Okay, Volhodar is past tense. It's over with. It's the Russians fully control Volhodar, and in fact are right now 9 kilometers north of that once heavily defended outpost of the Ukrainian military. It's gone. Now, if we look at what has happened, again, remember we were looking at this yesterday? Just a few days. Here we go. Now, the breakthrough occurs here. One more day. Continues forward. This area here, just to the south of Pokrovsk. Incredibly dire situation for these Ukrainian units that right now are being enveloped. Again. Yeah, not a good situation whatsoever. Now, compounding the actual front lines, the conscription efforts by the Ukrainian state. So right now, if you're a male aged 25 to, I believe, 60, someone correct me on that if I'm wrong, but be that as it may, even 50, let's say it's 50, right? That is too old to be conscripted into the military. Most U.S. soldiers here in the ununited states are out of military service in their 40s. I mean, think about it. You go into the military when you're between 18 and 20. You spend a full 20-year career if you in fact go that long, right? So you're 40 years old. And these Ukrainians, if you look at the average Ukrainian soldier that has been killed, I believe it's pushing 40. It's pushing 40. So the average U.S. soldier who is coming to the end of his career path enlistment of 20 years are essentially being killed off. If you look at what's happening inside of the Ukraine. Now, the Ukrainians are saying, well, we're trying to protect our population, right? So their theory is that if they don't draft 18, 19, 20, all the way up to 25, and they give them the chance to marry and have children, and then draft those poor suckers, then that is going to help the Ukrainian population. Now, the problem with that is especially here in the United States and the West, people are not having children even at age 25. It's not happening. That's going by the wayside. The birth rate here in the United States and Western Europe is dropping dramatically, and that's part of Western popular culture. It's what is being taught in the school systems. It's women's liberation in which they just don't have families. It's diabolical, really, if you think about what they're doing in terms of a cultural standpoint. But that's the Ukrainian thought process is, hey, let's just draft at age 25 and all the way to 60, and that will save the population. Well, it's not. And even if it does, let's say hypothetically that some poor Ukrainian soldier who's drafted at 25, he's got, let's say hypothetically, he's got a 2-year-old, right? He's got a 2-year-old. He's got a 2-year-old son at home with his wife, and he, let's say best case scenario, again, probably had that child when he was 23, which is incredibly young nowadays. And he is drafted at 25, and then he is killed 2 weeks later on the front line. What happens to that child? He doesn't have a father. How does his mother raise that child on her own, right? Just diabolical what they're really doing. Again, traditionally speaking, in major wars, major conflicts, yeah, it's always been the youth who bears the brunt of conflict. So here in the ununited states, World War II, yeah, there were older guys being conscripted, but they also recruited 18, 19, 20-year-olds into service as well. Now, on top of that, the things that you hear that are occurring inside of the Ukraine, again, just diabolical. You've got police that are roaming the cityscape of Kiev and other major Ukrainian cities, and when they make roadside stops, maybe a traffic violation or just a contact by Ukrainian police, they are now operating with the Ukrainian Ministry of Defense personnel that are essentially looking for what they believe is draft dodgers. Now, compounding that, even if, let's say, you produce your paperwork that says, "Hey, I've registered for conscription, I just haven't been called in yet." So let's say you do that, and then let's say that, for instance, there is a piece of information on that document. Maybe you didn't go get a medical checkup in the right amount of time. Okay? And that's not listed on that document. They will then apprehend you. They'll take you into custody, the Ukrainian state, and there has been reports of this actually occurring where individuals who have not been conscripted, that have full-time professional roles, maybe in the city that they live in, being contacted by the Ukrainian law enforcement agencies and then taken to what is essentially a camp. They are placed in that camp, and then they are immediately inducted into military service. And that's having an impact on the morale of the Ukrainian population. The Ukrainian population is damn near done with this war. I mean, the tipping point right now is very close to where you're going to see this entire front line just fall away and collapse. And especially when you have this fusion of what's happening on the front line and what's happening in the rear areas with these efforts by the Ukrainian state to conscript, in some cases, again, just old men. I mean, think about it. Think about you're 55 years old, and you're then told, "Hey, you know what? You're joining the military, and you're heading to the front line." What does that even do, right? I mean, you've got grandkids possibly, and that's going to have a ramification on all those individuals in that person's family. It's really just insanity what is happening right now inside of the Ukraine. But again, more importantly, just not what is happening in these rear area cities regarding conscription. It's the front line is just getting busted apart. Look at this. Yeah, it's not good. So then the question is what is the North Atlantic Treaty Organization going to do? Are they going to try and provoke a direct conflict between the Russian Federation and Western Europe? What is that going to look like? At the same time, that sort of conflict could also help what is happening here in the ununited states. Now, I'm going to change subjects here very, very quickly. Now, if we go back to you guys remember the George Bush, Al Gore elections? Remember the hanging Chad? Some of you are old enough to remember this. Well, I would wager many of you are. So, obviously, the Democrat Party hired a cubic shit ton of lawyers to fight the election of George Bush. Now, I'm no big fan of George Bush, but I'm just saying, this is the pot calling the kettle black, okay? Case in point, right? So an army of lawyers are hired for the George Bush, Al Gore election. Fast forward where we're at right now, here in the United States. The 65 Project. The 65 Project. Now, I know I'm pivoting quite a bit here, going from the war in Ukraine to the upcoming civil conflict and possibly civil war here in the United States. But look, the Democrat Party could quite possibly use world global war to stay in power. Very possible. And that's what leads me to the 65 Project. This leads me to the pot calling the kettle black. Now look at this. Defending democracy and the rule of law. In the rule of law. Right. A bipartisan, okay, if you say so, effort to deter future abuse of the legal system by lawyers seeking to overturn legitimate elections. Legitimate, right? Key word there. How about if you rephrase that with unlegitimate elections? Changes things a little bit, doesn't it? We will hold such lawyers accountable for past abuses and will work to revitalize the state bar disciplinary process so that lawyers, including public officials, who lie about election results and who fuel insurrection will face professional consequences. Wow. Our mission, following Biden's victory, right? An army of big lie lawyers filed 65 lawsuits. All right, again, go back in time. George Bush, Al Gore, who hired the most lawyers, filed 65 lawsuits based on bogus. I love that word, bogus. That's the best that these lawyers could come up with. Bogus assertions to overturn the election and give Trump a second term. While the nation's legal institutions stood up to this attempted coup via courtroom, Trump and his big lie lawyers have learned lessons from 2020 and are already working to seize control of state and local election processes and to prepare for malicious election litigation efforts. The 65 Project is a bipartisan effort to protect democracy. Look, anytime these Democrats talk about protecting democracy, it's just the opposite. It's not that. They're not trying to protect any form of democracy. Well, let me back up. They're trying to protect their version of democracy, and that would be the elimination of the Electoral College. That would be the elimination of the the idea that we are a representative constitutional republic. We are not a democracy. From these once and future abuses by holding accountable big lie lawyers who bring fraudulent and malicious lawsuits to overturn legitimate election results, and by working with bar associations to deter future abuses by establishing clear standards for conduct that punishes lies about the conduct or results of elections. And obviously you can click on it and you can learn more. So what they're saying is that if there is a suspicion that the vote was fraudulent, you will not be able to hire attorneys to represent your state, because those attorneys will lose their license to practice law. They will essentially become unemployed. Right? Yeah. Wow. But this is just one piece of this vast puzzle that is occurring right now to prevent Donald Trump from regaining the presidency. Look, remember Harris on the podium, waving her hands, screaming, "Never again." That is not coming from her. Okay? That is not something Kamala Harris would do on her own. She is being instructed by the powers that be within the deep state to say that. And they're telling you exactly what they're going to do. They're telegraphing it. Never again. We will not allow, by any means necessary, even if we have to fudge the election, or even if we have to utilize hard power in terms of using street thugs, Antifa, BLM, other groups, other far left-wing groups, to attack the institutions of governance here in the un-United States. They're willing to do it, and they're preparing for any and all outcomes. Absolutely. But again, at this point, I believe that the Democrats, the unitary one-party state, if the election is within 5 percentage points, I believe, based on the technology and the voting systems that are being used, they have a way to squeak out a win on that. What they're having difficulty with is if it's a landslide. If it's clear that Trump is just blowing Kamala Harris away in some of these battleground states, what's next? Well, the 14th Amendment, that's something they're using. This Project 65 and other methods like Project 65 or the 65 Project, they're indeed using. And then at the same time, you have the matter of the prospect of world war. Look what happened in the Ukraine, right? The Ukraine has not had an election since the war started. Even here in the un-United States, we have had elections during times of war. We have elections. Now you could say, well, a lot of folks in the Ukraine simply have left the Ukraine and they can't vote. Well, I'm sure that at this point, the majority of the Ukrainian population are probably gravitating towards wanting this war to end. They're probably not very happy with Volodymyr Zelensky at this point. But they can't say it. They can't come out. You can't do that in the Ukraine right now. You can't hold a public protest against Volodymyr Zelensky. The Constitution has been suspended. There are no elections. Doesn't exist. It is essentially a dictatorship right now inside of the Ukraine. There is no beacon of democracy in the Ukraine. So a war starts, a war expands. You have NATO fighting the Russian Federation. What would they do here in the ununited states? What would the Democrats do? Well, we're going to have to wait and find out, because it's coming. A lot of things are coming, and it's incredibly disturbing. The road that the ununited states, the former United States, is on right now, and it should terrify you. Now, with that being said, I have to ask, what are you doing to prepare for the upcoming election? Are you preparing for what could happen next? I have never seen anything like this in my life, and I don't believe we've really have seen this sort of rhetoric at any point in U.S. history outside of the lead up to the first American Civil War. I mean, think about it. Kamala Harris is going up and stating on a podium that the leading opposition candidate and former president of the United States, now the ununited states, is a fascist, is a Nazi, with probably not even knowing that Nazi is an acronym, right? I at this point don't believe that Kamala Harris even understands what Nazi even means. But again, I digress. So again, what are you doing to prepare for next week? Do you believe something is going to happen next week and the days and weeks after the upcoming election? And then we have to continue to watch what is happening with the war between the Russian Federation, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, and its NATO proxies as the Ukrainian army starts to collapse. What does NATO do? As always, thanks for joining us. More to come very, very soon. Have a good day.